Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. I'm David Suddjian, and tonight's episode is Colorado ID Masters, our Spring Migration Edition. I'm joined tonight by Laura Stedman and Nate Bond, and they'll leap in at intervals later in the presentation in our Let It Fly segments as we have a chance to review and discuss and even quiz on some of what we're talking about tonight. So we are going to focus on birds in spring migration, and I picked out a few groups that are notable spring migration challenges for us birders. Now, of course, there's lots of things that are happening in spring, and there are lots of different spring migration challenges, but we're just going to focus on a few of them tonight. And indeed, I've had several bird bombs that are great for spring migration. So if you want to check out some other episodes to help prime the pump for spring or answer some questions or to learn something, here's a listing of several of them. They're all available on our Denver Field Ornithologist YouTube channel and on our DFO webpage under the programs and events, and then on bird bombs. You can find a library of all these episodes there to focus on some of these other species that we're not going to be talking about tonight. And we're just on the cusp of spring opening the door here in Colorado. Some things from winter are changing up, and some of our earliest spring migrants are already appearing, including most of the species that are shown here. So here's our three springtime ID challenge groups we're going to focus on tonight. And we have our blue-winged, cinnamon, and green-winged teal. Now, the green wings have been around all fall and winter, but the blue-wing and cinnamon are not here in Colorado during the winter time. So they're coming to us fresh. Give us a chance to focus on those birds. And then the horned and eared grebes are two migrants that you can encounter out at reservoirs and lakes right now. And they provide a good challenge for birders all the time, trying to sort out which of the two am I looking at. And lastly, three sandpipers in the genus Tringa, the solitary sandpiper, lesser yellowlegs, and greater yellowlegs. Those will be our focus. And I'm trying to keep it onto the spring window. So there might be things about the fall season or with ducks during the eclipse time in the summer or late summer that are a little different, but we're not really going to touch on those tonight. So we'll keep it for our spring migration edition. So here are our three sets of species that are in focus, and they're in three different families, of course. The geese, swans, and duck family, Anatidae, and the grebe family, Podocipetidae, and the sandpiper family, Scolopacidae. So as you can see, I've got the common names and the scientific names. Looks like I forgot to put up the four-letter codes, but there's nothing unusual in this group, so we won't worry about those four-letter codes for tonight. And right away, we can see that among our teal, we all go by the name of teal, but presently they're in two different genera. So we have this genus Spatula, which also includes the northern shoveler, and you can think of that big spatula-shaped bill, the shovel-shaped bill on the shoveler, and it's the one that's more closely related to the blue-winged and cinnamon teal. And you can appreciate that when you pay attention to their bill shapes. But the green-winged teal, you have to go down like 5 or 6 species on your eBird list or in your current checklist to find the green-winged teal listed, not with the other things that are named teal, but in a different genus, Anis. And so here's our all of our teal, and we can include the shoveler as a sort of teal, at least teals by name plus the shoveler. And here's our two extra species in the genus Anis, just for the heck of it. Green-winged teal seeming pretty different from a mallard and a northern pintail, certainly in size, if not for other reasons. But indeed, that's how they're laid out in our taxonomy. And what's kind of interesting to note is that we have a blue-winged teal, right? But notice that 3 out of the 4 of these species in the sort of teal group by name have blue wings. So blue wings are particularly distinctive. And notice that all 4 of those ducks on the right side of the screen have green in their wings. So that part's not really distinctive either. But nonetheless, those are the names. Blue wings, green wings, we've all got them. So mix and match there with that one's kind of fun to look at. We're going to launch right into our ducks, and right away you're thinking, oh boy, Well, this is not a ID master challenge. I mean, these ducks are really easy, and indeed, the males are pretty easy to identify given any kind of decent view. They're beautiful, beautiful ducks, and I'm just going to briefly deal with the males, and then we're going to kind of leave them behind. I've highlighted some of the main differences between these, and you can notice that the bill shapes are a little different. The cinnamon in particular has a broader larger bill. Blue wing also has that spatulate shaped bill, but the green wing teal has a little differently shaped bill, reflecting some of its taxonomic distance from these blue wing and cinnamon teal. But they all have distinctive patterns and coloring, really not too many ID challenges here. So I'm not going to go piece by piece through all of these, but as you look back in the video, you can take a little more time on these points if you want to learn. The cinnamon teal is indeed the largest of the three, and the green wing teal is the smallest of the three. In fact, the female green wing teal, if I'm not mistaken, is the smallest of all of our ducks by weight, along with the really little bufflehead is really close in there, but a little bit heavier on the bufflehead. So the male ducks are easy. Here they are in flight, can appreciate those wing patterns again. See, the wing patterns of the blue wing and cinnamon are really very similar. But what about those lady ducks, the hens? Well, they're often with males, right? So maybe we can just identify them by association. A blue wing male is obviously going to be with a blue wing female and so on. Cinnamon female with the cinnamon male and the green wing female with the green wing male. And birds of a feather flock together. Well, okay, that's true a lot of the times, and sometimes you might even see a copulation happening and feel like, that's a pretty solid evidence. But we want to keep in mind that hybrids do happen. Now, they're not common. This is a blue-winged teal, cinnamon teal hybrid here that I have in the middle of the screen. So we don't worry too much about the hybrids among the ducks, but just kind of keep in mind that's one reason why ID by association is not always safe. And in fact, the ducks mix and match out there in the field as individuals and little groups might join and split apart and regroup and mix together, males and females. And so you can't always be sure, does that female go with that male or with the other male? So you don't want to rely, that is a good clue to use ID by association, but you don't want to rely on that and ignore actual field marks. And indeed, sometimes she's all by herself and you don't have the males to rely on there to help you with your identification. So the female ducks do indeed present some serious and significant challenges for us when we're out there looking at ducks during the springtime. So now we're going to focus in on the females. And we've got the blue-winged teal on the left side of the screen, cinnamon teal in the middle, and the little green-winged teal over there on the right. And we can just kind of focus on some of the main points. So let's kind of look at the blue-winged teal on the left. It has that spatulate or somewhat broad bill, but it's not as broad as on the cinnamon teal. Sometimes the bill shape, bill size can be a little bit hard to assess though. Another thing that is usually evident if you pay attention to it is the head shape, with the blue-winged teal having a more rounded head and the cinnamon teal a little bit flatter headed. But those kind of things are also a little subtle. So just sticking with blue wing and cinnamon first in my discussion, we'll bring in the green winged in a minute, because the blue wing and cinnamon are the two that often throw us a little more than the green wing does when we're considering. Notice the face pattern on the female teal here. On the blue wing teal, it is more distinct. The cinnamon teal, it is less distinct. So the blue wing has a more prominent dark eye line. That's the line going through the eye. See with the cursor there on both these images, fairly prominent. And the cinnamon teal has a less prominent eye line. Sometimes it doesn't really even seem apparent. Other times it definitely does. You can see it's really kind of missing a little bit on the two females in the images here. And I should mention that at times in the field, the appearance can change a little bit depending on the angle at which the bird is facing you or relative to you, and the lighting and so on. So you might see a cinnamon teal, and there's some individual variation as well, but you could see cinnamon teal showing a little more distinct face pattern than other individuals. So along with that more prominent eye line on the blue-winged teal, it often shows more prominent eye arcs, those pale little crescents above and below the eye are the eye arcs. More prominent on the blue wing, less evident, sometimes still kind of evident, but a little less so on the cinnamon teal. An important distinction that's often a good one to look at is the overall color tone of the head and even the breast. So on blue wing teal, I say it's a cool tone, kind of grayish. The cinnamon teal has a buffy tone or kind of brownish tone, a warmer tone. So not cool, but a little warmer, brown, buffy on the face and onto the breast as well. And another feature on the face that we can look at is that pale spot that's near the base of the bill. And that on the blue-winged teal, it usually contrasts pretty well and stands out from the darker parts of the face. And it kind of continues on around onto the chin. Now on the cinnamon teal, that pale spot at the base of the bill is less distinct, and it often does not continue obviously to the chin area. So it's a little more limited in restriction in the pale that's there. Blue-winged teal often looks a little neater and crisper in its body plumage patterns than the cinnamon teal. So especially we're looking at facial pattern, color tone on the head, bill size is good, head shape can be good. So now let's include the green-winged teal over on the right. And while the cinnamon is the biggest of the three, it's only a little bit bigger than the blue-winged teal, but the green-winged teal is smaller than both of the other species here. Definitely a small, compact shaped duck with a differently shaped head. Its head often looks a little bit squarish, rides kind of high in the water compared to lower floating cinnamon, especially, and blue-winged teal, and those teal have longer bodies than the compact shape of the green-winged teal. Green-winged has the smallest bill out of the three, no real kind of spatulate sense of the broad bill like the cinnamon teal at all. And it has a darker face than the other teal. And instead of having just the eye line that's kind of prominent, it often shows a cheek stripe as well. And it may not be a clear line, but you can see that on the lower picture of the green-winged teal here, a little less distinctly on the upper picture of the female. And their pale spot at the base of the bill is more like a continuation of a pale area between the eye stripe and the cheek stripe than it is like a round spot just at the base of the bill. So a little different there, sometimes not showing much paleness at the base of the bill relative. Now, an important mark that's easy to see on a distant green-winged teal and kind of a really good field mark on the male is this creamy butt side. That's the side of the butt. That's what I'm going to call it. And you know what? The female green-winged teal has the same pale area there at the side of her butt. Now, you don't want to look at the tail that's sticking out away from the body because it often is going to appear pale on the outer edge, as you can see even in the cinnamon teal. But the butt side, which would be here on the cinnamon, is brown, but here on the green-winged teal, that butt side is whitish or kind of creamy colored, matching the pattern of the male green-winged teal, although not as extensive. So that's a really good mark to look at on the small green-winged teal. Here's a few other images of each of these species. And again, we can focus on the bill size and shape. And look at the face patterns on the blue wing, nice and distinct eye line, distinct eye arcs, distinct pale area at the base of the bill connecting to pale chin. The cinnamon teal, less distinct in those areas. Look at the color difference, that kind of cool grayish tone on the blue wing female, whereas the female cinnamon is a warmer tone, maybe a buff there. Compared to the dark head of the relatively dark head of the female green-winged teal. Again, with sort of two stripe actions going on, an eye stripe and a less distinct cheek stripe there. Notice the head shapes on the different species, a little different. Now, one of them showing, I didn't talk about this when we were looking at the other ducks, but I should mention now, I'm going to see if I can just flash back just a bit here, bear with me, just to these flying birds. And we're going to look at the wing on the cinnamon teal in the top center. These blue areas here are the wing coverts, as are the white here, upper wing coverts, secondary coverts. The green here is the area we call the speculum. So that's an important area on our dabbling ducks for color. And that often, sometimes with the wing coverts, will poke out on the closed wing. As you can see here on the cinnamon teal, it seems to be showing green, its green speculum there on the closed wing. I'm going to fast forward back to our female teal here. And out of these three that are shown across the bottom, only the green-winged teal on the right here is showing the green speculum. But as we just learned, showing green there doesn't rule out these other two species, but it is a good clue to look at to see what the color is there. And the green wing, I think, tends to show a bit of that speculum on the closed wing more than the others. Sometimes you don't see it at all because the scapulars and sometimes the tertials on the closed wing are hanging over this part of the secondaries on the closed wing. So you may not see it, or as the bird rearranges its wing a little bit, it may reveal itself and then disappear. You can see it well on the female green wing in the upper picture here alongside that male. So here we'll just take another look at our females before we do a little bit of a let it fly segment. And we've got our three laid out here in the same order. And we're just going to notice again the color tone, particularly on the blue wing and cinnamon, cool toned versus warm toned on the face, the prominence of the eye line and contrasting eye arcs on each species. Looks like the cinnamon teal in the top center has pretty contrasty eye arcs, but not much of an eye line going on. And that spot at the base of the bill is not very prominent. We can contrast with the blue wing, nice eye line, contrast the eye arcs in a more prominent pale spot there on the bill. If you look at the middle picture of the cinnamon teal, it has a pretty bland face. So that's a good way to think about it too. If you see a bland faced female teal, then you're probably looking at a cinnamon teal, meaning the bland, meaning really not much patterning going on. And in contrast with the green winged teal, we've got that almost double stripe effect in all three of these images, sometimes a little more evident than in others, and a squarish head, excuse me. Now I notice on the bottom right, I didn't label it, but we've thrown in an extra species here on the bottom right. I'll let you look at it for a moment if you haven't already figured out what it is. It's not a teal. In fact, it's in another genus of ducks, the genus America. It is American widgeon. All right, so you can see it's quite a bit bigger than that green-winged teal. And what else can you see on this green-winged teal? Well, hey, there's that mark I was talking about. That's a really good one to look at. So you're seeing a brown female dabbling duck, and sometimes the only color feature it might show is this whitish area on the side of the butt. You can see it in the top picture and there in the middle one, and that part is kind of hidden, but we're looking maybe at part of it over the shoulder of the widgeon there in the bottom picture. So that butt stripe or butt side is a good thing to look for as well. You can kind of appreciate the overall dark character of the green-winged teal. All right, so a good little review of our female teal. And now we're going to go to our first Let It Fly segment here, a little review. And I'm going to invite Laura and Nate to chime in here. And we're going to start out with this image here on the left. So if either of you guys want to give any input, what do you think we got here?
Yeah, so the first thing I see is we're looking at a female duck, so we can narrow it down there, right?
Yep.
Um, and the bill to me looks pretty big. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I'm agreeing there. I'm I'm also noticing we've got a pretty distinctive eye line. Um, and there is some white at the base of the bill. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about if it's going down to the chin, like David said. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the face looks pretty gray. It's not a very warm tone, and it's a little hard to tell how far down that white patch goes, but it really does sort of jump out in
And I think
contrast to the rest of it.
the prominence in contrast might be more important than how far it extends if you want
Yeah,
Hmm.
to consider
yeah.
that. So,
So it sounds
what
like
is
we're
that take?
leaning blue wing teal.
Okay.
That's where I'm at as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to put up another image here. So we're saying blue wing teal on the left.
Yeah, so this one in comparison, it definitely doesn't have that big pale spot. And it doesn't really have much in the way of sort of lines through the eye. What do you think,
Yeah,
Nate?
the build too to me is jumping out as even more. It looks more like a shoveler bill, which David I think said that the cinnamon teal had a bigger bill, And I'm also getting a little bit of that brown. So for me, that the bill is really standing out in this picture. I don't know if it would stand out that much in the field, but yeah, this picture of the bill seems to be pretty chonky.
Yeah, it's a cinnamon teal.
Okay, cinnamon teal in the middle, blue wing left, cinnamon in the middle. Here's a third image.
So this one, I don't see anything. Maybe a little bit of an eye line on the face, and I can try to imagine one on the cheek. This duck looks a little cuter to me. I'll put in the cute factor.
Can you see any color on it?
It does have some brownish tones kind of along the sides, but it's not really, it's not, it's hard with the beak here because you can't get much perspective with it sort of turning away. I can't tell sort of the shape super well. Uh,
Yeah.
Would you say the face, the head or face is kind of bland looking or more distinctly marked?
I would say it's pretty bland. There's maybe a
Yeah.
very faint eye line, definitely not much in the way of the eye arc.
Yeah. And one thing, it was a new point for me. You mentioned, David, that green-winged teal females have that sort of buffy patch on the side of the butt, and I don't see that on this duck.
You know, we can see some pale on the side of the tail. That's what's sticking out here,
Yeah,
but not the side of the butt, which
there's
is
no
right
patch.
there. And also, can there? I see some color on this bird.
Yeah, I see that there's like a blue triangle on its wing there, and I'm in my mind, I'm going back and forth of like, is that like a artifact of like sunlight on some green, or is it really blue? Um,
So you notice it's kind of a powdery blue. It's not really a deep sort of iridescent, like the bright kind of color we see, whether it be blue or green, depending on what species, you know, and whatever. Like mallard has a rather bright kind of purpley blue on its speculum. Green-winged teal has a bright green, which sometimes can look blue, but not this powdery blue, which we see up on the wing coverts on some of the
yeah.
species we've been talking about. So what do you think this might be?
What do you think, Nate? I can also guess too,
I
but I want to be the one to guess them all.
I want to watch this bird just swim around a little bit longer,
Yeah.
get a couple more angles on it. Maybe Harry Potter style with the moving pictures, but I don't think David's gonna let us.
No.
Uh,
I think if you focus on the face pattern or maybe lack thereof, and the fact that there's kind of a bit of powdery blue here and no butt stripe, as Laura was pointing out,
oh,
that could maybe help.
yeah, I feel like I'm kind of leaning towards the cinnamon teal.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. And I think you're right. Here's I just threw in the males that were with the females above,
Mhm.
kind of helping just looking at shapes. I don't want to use the males as an ID crutch, but it's a good clue. I couldn't have put the males in the original shot, or you would have known right away, right? But you got to write blue wing, cinnamon, and cinnamon. So
The last one
excellent.
was tricky. It
It
the
was
head
a little tricky.
the head shape on that last one on the right there looks really kind of square, roundish to me, but I think that's the angle of it.
And as always, or often is the case on head shape, you want to consider, that it can be a little variable, depending on what a bird is doing. And then the angle of the bird facing its head slightly away from us is making it a little hard to compare. But here's a little summary of some of the main points that we talked about already in looking at these birds. Now, here's another picture I'm putting up. And here we have two ducks, two female type ducks.
Yeah, so the one on the left definitely has a big shovelly bill, and it's
Yeah,
got the eye line.
it's got a little more white at the base than the other
Mhm.
one. Um, they both have that eye line. It's hard to tell if the one in the background is sort of more, if the face is darker because it's in the shade, or if it actually sort of has a darker eye line.
I think they're both in the same lighting.
Okay.
So the back one maybe looks like it has a darker head than the foreground bird.
Yeah.
What other differences do you see?
The bill on the back one looks a little smaller to me.
And it doesn't have, David was just saying the head size is variable. And I wouldn't say that it's square, but it does have a little bit more of an angular sort of corner on the back and on the bottom of the back of its head than the other one, which the front one is really rounded in terms of its head.
That's a good point. And in fact, okay, I'll let you continue your discussion. Anything else you see that's different?
Overall color is pretty similar to me. There's like a little bit of a white speck on the back one on the butt, which, I'm kind of leaning a little bit towards the green wing teal for the back one just because of the head shape. Um, and a little bit darker of a head. But I don't know if that is sort of just confirming where I'm at seeing that white or what do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I'm also kind of looking at that, and is that just, the light hitting it or a feather that's loose? It doesn't it doesn't look like a big buffy creamy patch so much to me, but um and I'm also like looking at the size differences of these two birds. They don't look like they're that different in size, but it's hard to tell too. I think one's maybe facing a little away. That
Right.
one's facing a little bit away from us, and the other one's kind of horizontal there.
Yeah.
So are
Well,
we going blue wing teal for the one in the front, would you think?
That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. What do you think, David?
I think that's a good call based on the kind of cool toned face and the nice, fairly sharp pattern of the eye line and the eye arcs and a contrasty pale spot at the base of the bill. And this area at the side of the butt is different between these two species. This one has a pale sort of stripe or patch there, which is a good mark, of course, for the green winged teal, which I think is, as Nate was suggesting. And also you can see this cheek stripe. Uh,
Hmm.
Not real prominent, a little bit subdued, but definitely evident as a sort of a two parallel lines there on the face. Now, the blue wing has just a hint of that, but it's only a hint. And that's often the case with the blue wing teal. So indeed, we have the blue wing and green wing. And a little challenged with our size comparison, perhaps because of the different angles, and sometimes it's hard to judge in one photo for something like that. Another thing that Nate was noting about the different head shape, definitely kind of rounded here. And I didn't mention this, especially when we're looking at the male green-winged teal, but they have almost like a helmet type effect with it. It kind of projects outward on the nape and cuts in at the base of the nape or the lower part of the neck. And you can kind of see that angle right there. And very pronounced, more pronounced on the male green-winged teal. And when they display, they actually look really helmeted. So clearly a different head shape between those is actually a good mark as well. So there's a little summary of our green-winged teal. Um, uh, Features, and I put laurel spot lacking. Laurel, I should say, like the spot at the base of the bill lacking or meh, because sometimes there's a paleness there, but often it's not as nice and sharp and distinct as we see, say, on the blue wing teal. So good job there. And let's see, I think we got another let it fly slide here, and these ones are numbered, so we can maybe go through in order, if you don't mind. And we've got two ducks again on number one there on the left.
Oh, well, so number one, the duck in the front, that bill looks relatively small to me, and um the kind of head shape, I would call that front one. It's also smaller than the other one. I would
And
call
we've
that one
got the
green teal.
Yeah, I was gonna say also this is the first one that I feel like we can really see that white sort of
Yeah.
buff feature that David was talking about. Um and the other one in the back has such a plain face. There's a little bit of the eye arc. Um and the bill, like you said, is definitely bigger. I'm thinking that's probably and it's brown,
Mhm.
which makes me think cinnamon teal.
Yeah, I think
Cinnamon
so.
in the back, and you were saying green wing in the front, I guess.
Yep.
And we can look, we could both of them are showing a little bit of color in the wing. And notice this is the speculum we're seeing here on the foreground bird, the green winged teal. And you can get that iridescent sense, even though our lighting is not perfect there. And overall has a green tone as compared to this is a little bit sky blue. And we're actually looking at part of the upper or part of the secondary coverts and not the speculum. So, and you can even sense a little different position on the wing just slightly, but just looking at those colors in detail, no white butt stripe effect here on the back bird. So, oops, I wouldn't want to go all those yet. Sorry, nope, I didn't give it all away, but you got that right. The green wing teal and cinnamon teal in the back, and the green wing, we can say not a blue wing. Because there's the laurel, the spot at the base of the bill there is really pretty indistinct. This particular individual doesn't show much of that cheek stripe I was talking about. So sometimes that's more or less evident, I guess. We can't really see the back of the head too well to talk about that other feature, but I think you got that right, green wing and cinnamon teal. How about photo number 2? Not cooperative here, out in the cattails there and sleeping.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I was not listening to anything you were saying moments ago because I was worried about this number 2. So I I really was trying to look for some clues, because usually I like to see the head of a bird to be able to kind of ID it. But one of the things I do sort of see peeking out of the head of that other bird, I think I can see a little bit of an eye line, and that plus sort of the lighter color around the rump has me kind of leaning towards the green wing teal. Yeah,
So
but it's
that
not.
tail area there you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd go with that.
Okay. I think that's correct. And we really only have this one solid mark that we can see well. And that's not a mark that we have on our other 2 teal species. So green winged teal for number 2. What about number 3?
I think David might be trying to trick us with number 3.
I don't do that.
Never. David never plays tricks. Well, he's definitely got a little bit of an eye stripe. The bill looks, I would say, petite. Doesn't look like that shoveler style bill. Certainly not that I would expect on a cinnamon teal.
Yeah, the bill to me, the thing that sort of stood out to me, and I was sort of comparing it to the green wing teal in picture 1 a little bit, is I think the head is a lot cuter, and then the bill was giving me sort of a little bit of a bluish tone.
Hmm.
And that tells you.
I'm leaning towards maybe being a widgeon instead of
Oh.
a teal.
Hmm.
I hope I'm onto something.
Well, I don't think you are though, because the
Oh,
widgeon don't have patterned sides. They have more of an even pinkish color, warm, really warm tone there.
okay.
And they don't have really an eye line on a widgeon. And while the bill is paler here and maybe has a little blue tone, it's not like a really a bluish tone with a dark tip. So
Okay.
no, I'm throwing that curveball at you, not yet anyway.
Oh
Not
man.
yet.
I just don't want to get pulled over, over me, but I guess, I'm anticipating something soon.
Well, there is
Uh,
another mark you can
does
see.
this one have that pale butt patch kind of sticking out of the end there?
Yep. So here's the tail feathers. They're not that, but this is the side of the butt, and it is contrasty whitish with the rest of what we can see in this area, just
Yes.
like we see here on the
And
number
it
2 bird.
doesn't have that pale the laurel area is kind of pale, but it's not that like bright sort of white pale that we've seen on some of the blue wing teal. So I would call this a green wing teal too.
Yeah, I think that is correct. And in fact, you can see that even though this has hardly in this particular view or angle or individual, hardly any of the cheek stripe, the pale area here from the bill almost makes a line going back in between the 2 darker stripes. And you got to kind of squint to see that cheek stripe, but there is a little darker there. I think you were onto something with saying cute though, Nate, because The green-winged teal does appear cuter in the sense its head is a little differently shaped and kind of gives it a different cute look. Maybe not dissimilar to a widgeon, but that is a green-winged teal. So excellent. These female ducks can be challenging, especially when they're all by themselves without anybody to contrast with. All right, so we're going to continue now through to our two grebe species, and we'll deal with them one at a time because we have some plumage differences to concern ourselves with. During the winter time, the horned grebe is pretty localized in Colorado. Really, by once things freeze up, most all the horned grebes, I think, are mostly down at Pueblo Reservoir, which stays open water. It can sometimes have quite a few horned grebes and hard to find elsewhere. But during the winter, in the fall, late fall, and as they're moving through, and then some that are around in the winter, we see basically a white and black or white and dark gray type plumage. Now, the breeding season plumage is much brighter and much more fun to see. And by the time they get, to late March, certainly April and May, horned grebes have attained this bright plumage, but there's a transition time in between. But it's good to start from either end of the spectrum in considering what we're looking at. So the horned grebe, as is the eared grebe, is a small-sized grebe. So we can think of western grebe as a large grebe. And another small one we have is the pied-billed grebe, but that's different. We're not considering that tonight. That's a more brown gray-bodied grebe with a very different bill. So the horns of the small grebe, and we'll notice it has a short, kind of straight bill. And one thing that's an excellent mark, if you remember to look for it, now it is a little easier when the birds are somewhat close, but you can also see it far away with your good optics or a nice camera lens, is this pale tip on the bill. See that on all of these individuals. That pale tip on the bill is unique to the horned grebe. The eared grebe does not have that. And the head, if you get rid of the horned part, is kind of flat on top. Doesn't really have, again, disregarding these plumes, it doesn't really have a peaked area except sometimes maybe towards the rear of the crown. And the butt on the horned grebe often slopes down into the water, looking a little less fluffy oftentimes than the eared grebe does. So considering our non-breeding birds on the right, that kind of black or gray and white plumage, and recall a small western grebe on the horned grebe because it's very neatly marked, especially on the head and neck. Notice the nice distinct white cheek patch and white coming down the front of the neck, contrasting pretty cleanly with the dark area on the side and back of the neck, kind of reminding us of a western grebe. It has wholly white cheeks with the dark line behind the eyes pretty much forming a straight cutoff going back from behind the eye. So that border forms a nice sort of straightish line. And you can look at the lores on these birds. That's this area here between the eye and the bill, and they're pale. A little more so on some individuals than others, but that pale area is often a good thing to look for. Now, the breeding birds are very different. The horned grebe has this swath of gold coming back from the eye on the side of the crown. And when the crown is not erect like it is here on the left bird, it looks just like a swath going back, kind of a band of gold. And the coloration on the body is a chestnut red, and that same color extending onto the neck. All right, so there's our horned grebe. Now let's shift forward here to the eared grebe. We've got the same kind of layout with breeding plumage birds on the left and essentially non-breeding season birds on the right. Again, it's a small grebe, rather similar in overall size to the horned grebe. The bill on the eared grebe is longer and thinner, and it lacks that pale tip. I can just flash back, look at the pale tip, and just focus on any of these particularly nice images of the horned grebe and see that whitish tip on the tip of the bill, and the eared grebe is lacking that in all these images. The outer tip may be kind of gray, but it's not contrastingly white. And the shape of the bill is different if you look carefully. The eared grebe has this recurved bill. On the lower mandible is recurved rather. There's a little angle here, and it's like the outer part is kind of pulling up a little bit. It often has a peaked head. And again, we won't worry about these plumes associated with breeding plumage, but we can see that the head has kind of a peak. And it's either in the middle of the crown or even forward angle, unlike the peak toward the rear of the crown on the horned grebe. And they often have a fluffy butt that's riding high in the water. So if we look at the non-breeding plumage birds, which a lot of the eared grebes would be, if you see one happening around now, it's probably going to be in this plumage still, maybe beginning to molt a little bit, not like the ones on the left yet. Here we are in the middle of March as I'm speaking. You can see it doesn't have a clean white cheek, but it has a dark projection coming down from the crown that's making things look a little less neat, a little less white and contrast. He doesn't really remind us of a Western grebe, especially, and the neck is kind of dirty looking. Doesn't have that nice white front, dark back, but instead it's kind of grayish across the front, not so contrasty. The breeding plumage birds have this beautiful fan of gold on the side of the head instead of the band of gold along the side of the crown. So real difference. And remember, the horned grebe had a red neck. The eared grebe has a black neck. In fact, in Europe, it's called the black-necked grebe. Same species, but it's a different common name. Okay, so I think we've got a little bit of a review slide here to help us consider what I was just talking about. And so we can look at the breeding plumage birds, that horns versus a spray of gold, different position on the head, and the crown shape being a little different. Now, the eared grebe has these big erectile crest in the middle of the head there that can make it a very pointy crowned looking bird. And look at the neck color, black versus red there on the front part of the neck at least. And then we've got some various birds here on the right, and it looks like we've got eared across the bottom part and horned across the top. Again, that pale tip on the bill, good horn grebe mark lacking on the eared. And look at the bill shapes here. It's a longer, more slender bill on the eared and a shorter bill on the horned. And the eared, that definite recurvature on the lower mandible is a feature that is a little different. Compare the cheek pattern on these non-breeding plumage birds. A nice white cheek with a distinct line or distinct demarcation there, and a more blended situation, not so much white and dirtier necks. Horn grebe versus ear grebe. And another thing that's kind of fun to consider is what's going on with their timing. Now they do, as you can see, they overlap a lot, but the horned grebe arrives earlier in Colorado. This is, I believe, a graph for the greater Metro Front Range region. And the horned grebe has a little, as a decided earlier arrival by, 2 or 3 weeks compared to the eared grebe. You can see those peaks offset that way. So we're in a window right here now in the middle of March, and the horned grebe is like over twice as frequent as the eared grebe. Not that you can't see eared grebes now, they're just starting in, but that's something interesting to notice. And the horned grebe is going to taper off sooner, so that by the time you get to the early part of May, there's hardly any horned grebes around, but by then the eared grebe is the podoceps du jour, if you will. And so that timing is important to notice. Less of a timing difference in the fall, except to notice the horn comes in later. So the eared grebe breeds more southerly than the horned grebe. Horned grebe is moving through a little earlier and coming back a little later on the graph there. So now in springtime, things get a little messy. So we're springing forward from that non-breeding plumage into the breeding colors. And a lot of the grebes you see now in March and April in particular are kind of in between and messy looking. So you still have some of the same features you can rely on, but they are transitional. So you can still look at the head shape. We've got horns on the left, ears on the right. Is there any kind of a peak situation going on? Is it toward the rear of the crown? Or it's any kind of peak situation is probably pretty good for the eared grebe. And you can look at the bill shapes in color. So a little hard to tell on some of these images, but you can see the contrasty white tip definitely on some of these horned images as not being represented, say, on these eared grebes down here. And they're going to develop the neck color that's appropriate to the species. So as they molt, The neck will become blackish, especially the fore part of the neck and the whole neck on the eared grebe, and the horn grebe will get some warm reddish coloration developing in there. And then also developing are those gold areas on the head. And that can always be a little tricky to decide what you're looking at, but the ear has a little fan developing versus the horn getting that gold along the side of the crown. So beware for these transitional molting birds right now, this time of year, definitely can present an ID challenge, but try to put together what you know and see if you can pan it out. We'll go to a let it fly segment here with the grebes. And it'll start with one that looks like it's in a non-breeding plumage, pretty much entirely here on the left.
Okay. Well, the first thing that jumps out to me about this one is that really clean kind of line between the dark on the top of the head and the white cheek. It's a really clean looking line.
The the bill too to me looks pretty stubby. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm not seeing the white tip, but that's something that seems like it's not going to show up in every photo.
you might
Right.
need to like hold your laptop closer.
You got to get the right angle.
Yeah, I don't see it there either, but the shape of the bill is shorter looking, like you say.
Yeah, so I think that one is a horn grape.
I agree.
Okay. And again, the neck is not messy in the front, none of that kind of gray coming forward. And this bird has that sloped rear end kind of profile that's typical of the horn grebe. So I think that's a good call there. And now we have another bird here. This one,
Um,
we have a better look at the bill and everything, really.
yeah, the bill looks definitely longer than our first bird and a little bit more sharp. It has, I think the length just gives it a little bit more of that sharper look. And the head is got a little bit of a peak going on, definitely compared to the other one, a lot rounder at the top of the head.
Yeah, and it's also the side of the head and then also the neck just looks messier.
Hmm.
And it's not a messy, like it looks like it's busy molting and it's halfway in between molting. It looks like a messy white, black, gray kind of mix. So we're going eared grebe with this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And we don't see any white spot, white tip on the bill, even though we have a good look. This one doesn't show a fluffy butt, but that could also be affected by if the bird is diving or something. It's probably not going to show that as much. So that's, you don't want to always rely on just one mark. Say, oh, it looks like an ear, except it doesn't have a fluffy butt, so it can't be. Well, that doesn't work like that. So you got that right. Good job, ear grebe. And here we've got one now that is maybe in transition.
Ooh.
Hmm. Yeah, it's got a little bit, you can almost see a little, I know you said that the gold is not a ID feature, but it is pretty cool to kind of see a little bit of that gold starting around the eye coming in.
Yep, right in there.
Mhm. Yeah, this one, the head looks pretty unpeaked to me. It's got a little bit of some feather ruffling, but and also that bill doesn't look like it doesn't look thin enough, and it doesn't definitely doesn't look upturned to me, and I can imagine a pale tip on it.
That's what that is right there.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think this one, I agree with everything you said. I just would also sort of point out that the last one, the ear seemed so messy on the face. It seems like
yeah,
once you start to kind of have that breeding plumage come in, this one, the face is a lot more messy. So it's nice to be able to see that head shape and the bill to kind of lean towards the horned.
yeah, for sure.
We also see that the sides of the bird are becoming kind of a warm tone, and those are going to become kind of chestnut brown in the end. So we've got a little change going on there too, and it's developing some dark across the front of the neck, but still largely white versus kind of a little bit grayish there. So yeah, so horn grebe in the early part of its molt. This is exactly the sort of thing you might see right now as an example in mid-March. Okay, so here we've got another bird that looks kind of messed up. So this one must be molting too.
Yeah.
This
Um,
one, This one I'm really excited for. I feel like I can see the white tip on there, which I think we should, consider everything, but that has me excited because we haven't had a photo with the white tip quite yet.
Yeah, yeah, that really stands out. And that's a new ID tip for me, the white tip. Um, this bird also has a very kind of flat, rounded, unpeaked head, which we talked about. And even though the head is messy, it looks like there's like a pretty clear line between the sort of top of the head, which is turning brown, and then that paler white cheek patch. And there's no fluffy butt.
So this is,
That's a horned grebe.
right, and in fact, a little bit of gold coming in along the side of the crown, as we were talking about, just this maybe a little farther along in its molt than the bird on the right, or number three, um, the transitional horn grebe. Excellent. So here we've got one that's looking a little prettier. It's a dead-on view almost. There's a few
Yeah.
different solid ID marks that are visible here, though. Of course, the bird would probably turn a little bit and give away a better
Make it
that
easy.
this is the bird bomb's view, and you got to take what you get.
Yeah, we can think about the neck though. The neck looks pretty black to me. I'm not seeing much other than black there for
Yeah.
this view.
Yeah. So a black-necked grebe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If for some reason we couldn't see that though, it does look like that head. The eared grebes kind of like have this like mohawk thing almost going on, and it does look like the head is really peaked.
Yeah.
And then I don't see a white tip on that bill.
Nope,
You
just
can see
black.
the wispiness too to the
Oh, yeah.
gold.
Mhm.
I, li- I like that wispy is good.
So now I've got a tricky one here to close out this slide. What do you
Oh.
think?
I knew you'd get tricky, but I didn't know we'd have to get. I didn't know that. That's definitely a widgeon. I think that landed just kind
Hey,
of
hey, hey,
accidentally went under.
you got it. It's a diving widgeon. Absolutely. Or a grebe spa. Either way would be fine for that one. So good job there on our Let It Fly grebes. So let's continue into our third group here, these three sandpipers in the genus Tringa, which also has the willet in it, and but we're not going to look at the willet tonight. But these three are all kind of similar. We've got the solitary sandpiper on the left, lesser yellow legs in the middle, and greater yellow legs on the right. And they all have kind of a patterning above, but you'll notice that there are some differences. The left-hand bird is the odd one out in terms of the patterning above. We see black and white spots almost like little stars. But over, and these are breeding plumage or on their way to breeding plumage. All of these individuals on the yellow legs, we see black blotches on the upper parts as well as the white dots. And there's always some gray left over. And most of the ones we see are moving through and don't get to their fully high breeding plumage, which is lacking more of the gray toned feathers and is more black and white. But we don't see that because they're still molting and it takes that last bit when they're further north from here. So a lot of ours have gray, but then black blotches with the white, in contrast to not that kind of black black blotchiness on the solitary sandpiper. And I like to think of this as a spangled sort of a look, typical of the yellow legs. The bills are worth looking at. Is it straight, like on the solitary and lesser yellow legs? Does it have a slight little upsweep, like the greater yellow legs often shows? And the greater has a relatively long bill. And it often, depending on your lighting and if the bird is reasonably close, it shows a paler base to the bill, whereas the other two tend to be more dark billed. We're going to bring in some other pictures, but let's look just for a moment at the timing. And we're really only concerned with springtime here. And look, they all have three different patterns of when they get into our area, although the peak is pretty similar for all three. The peak is in the later part of April. And the first one in is the greater yellow legs. And here we are in the middle of March. It's already making headroads into Colorado at this time, while the lesser yellowlegs is only just creeping into the state on average, according to this eBird chart. So the greater yellowlegs is ahead of the lesser by 2 to 3 weeks, and they're both ahead of the solitary by 2 to 3 weeks. So we don't really expect to see solitaries maybe for another month or so from where we are now on March 13th. So that timing is worth noting and paying attention to. So when I go out tomorrow, say to Chatfield State Park, and I see a yellowlegs, odds are greater yellowlegs. And if it's any of these tringas, odds are it's not going to be a solitary too early. So it's good to factor the timing of things in to what you're thinking about with the ID. So we'll bring in a few more pictures here. First, the solitary sandpiper. Notice it's a rather dark appearing bird in flight, dark under wings, has a dark rump area. And here we can see that kind of spotted effect above without blackish blotches. And they often indeed are solitary, or maybe you'll see one or two together, but not in a little grouping. And they like kind of quiet backwater areas often, especially where there's some vegetation or maybe even some driftwood piled up in places like that. A little habitat difference. The yellowlegs, in contrast, is a more spangled above with those black blotches. And we can see more markings on the flanks of the yellowlegs in breeding plumage. And they're more active, really, than the solitaries are. I don't think I mentioned solitaries have a distinctive pattern of bobbing their rear quarters a bit like a solitary sandpiper. Sometimes the whole body, I mean, like a spotted sandpiper, whole body going up and down. The yellowlegs tend to bob their head and neck up and down, maybe the body too a little bit, never kind of wagging the tail. So lesser yellowlegs in flight, both species actually have white rumps versus the dark rump we saw in the solitary. And we've got one pretty far along in its molt towards alternate plumage. Again, looking at the bill shape, kind of straight. And now we'll look at a few extra pictures of the greater yellowlegs right away. Look at the bill length. It looks like a long-billed bird. And that upsweep is a subtle thing, but I think you can see the bill sweeping upward just ever so slightly there on the greater yellowlegs. Has a similarly pale rump compared to the lesser yellowlegs. The greater often shows a bit of an angle kind of thing going on in the lower part of the neck that the lesser yellowlegs is lacking. A little subtle shape difference there, sometimes more evident than not. So here we've got, let's take a little closer look at the bill situation. You can kind of compare right away just visually, a longer bill on the greater on the right and shorter on the lesser. But what you can also do, since you may not have them together, is you can kind of imagine what if you kind of, it's gross to think about it, but you snap that bill off and overlaid it against the head. You see the length of the bill on the lesser yellowlegs is about equal to the width of the head front to back, whereas the greater's bill is longer, so it extends longer than the width of the head in your imaginary exercise. Don't really break off any yellowleg bills, but it is a good feature there. So we'll just have a little summary here. Now we've got 4 images showing 2 individual birds on each image. And right away on some of these, you can see a size difference. It's so handy when they're together, which sometimes you get, but certainly not all the time. You can compare the size and compare the bill length and the bill shape, whether it's got a little bit of an upsweep, like we see, I think, pretty clearly in the center bird, a little bit on the left, even a little bit on the right, whereas the lesser yellowlegs is very straight billed. And then the birds on the bottom, well, they don't look a whole lot different. They're similar sized and look like they both have long bills. I think my text box is kind of covering over part of the bill of one of them there. But if the bird's bigger than a killdeer, good reference species, clearly bigger than a killdeer, which is often around someplace close by, that's going to be a greater yellowlegs. The lesser yellowlegs is more close to the size of a killdeer. Bill longer on the greater, slightly upswept, often with a pale base. I think you can see that in the top center bird, a pale base on the greater's bill. And the call notes are different. Not going to go into that here, but the greater has a more strident, often a 3-note call. Lesser is not necessarily 3-note, a little more mellow sound. The greater tends to be a little more active in terms of kind of running around after prey that it'll pick at on the surface. So the basic things you want to consider there in the box on the left. And I'll put up their names. So we've got lesser, greater, lesser, greater, lesser, greater across the three upper pictures, and then double greater on the bottom right. All right, so let's let it fly now with our tringas. And I've got three images up here. Don't assume they're three different species, but they could be. I love the water trail from the foot on this lifted foot of this bird that's walking along. That's pretty cool.
Cool. So we started the one on the top left there with the water trail. The first thing I noticed is that the body does look very spangled and its legs are very yellow.
Yeah,
So
that's gonna
I
help
would,
us definitely to rule out the solitary.
yeah, yeah. And then if we look at the bill length, the bill doesn't really read as particularly upturned. I can almost imagine it, but the length of it, it does look very long compared to the head length to me. So,
Right,
Yeah.
so longer
We
than that width.
yeah, we don't have the birds in the same shot, but the bird on the upper left and the bird on the upper right are relatively similar, and using that right one as sort of maybe a little bit of a cheat, but the bill does look definitely better, bigger and than the head by quite a bit.
yeah, agreed.
So that
So
makes this,
greater on the left and lesser on the right, I think is what we're saying.
Yeah, I think
okay.
so.
And that kind of blackish patches here, helping to create that spangled effect. That it was this one, maybe the left-hand bird is maybe farther along in its molt than the right-hand bird because of the more gray feathers here. And you can see it doesn't have so many left here on this left-hand one. That's a little bit what I was talking about. But that spangled effect created by those black patches is a good sort of ID feature to at least get you to the yellow legs. And we can use the other features we were talking about. Well, that leaves us the bird in the middle. Is that a yellow legs or is this going to be the solitary? It
The
has yellow legs.
It does have yellow legs. The eye ring and sort of just the grayish back is a pretty significant contrast for me to the other birds. Even it's cool to see the sort of plumage differences coming through, but I think even sort of considering something like that, it's just more of a washed out gray with some tiny specks of white compared to the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also not much coloration patterning on the sort of underside of the bird compared to those other yellow legs.
So you think that's the solitary then?
Yeah.
We're going solitary, yeah.
Great. And I didn't mention really about the face pattern in my discussion, but the solitary tends to have the eye ring as the prominent feature, whereas on the yellow legs, there's an eye line that's a prominent feature, or maybe co-prominent with an eye ring effect, but definitely an eye line that's generally kind of lacking on the solitary. And we're noticing the different patterning here. This one's maybe not so far along in its molt. There's not really much black spotting going on, but what we do see are little spots. And we can even see a little bit of the rump here. We got some upper tail coverts, but there's dark here instead of what would be white on the either of the yellow legs. And they all three have yellow legs, but the yellow leg species have the two yellow leg species have brighter yellow legs. The solitary's legs are a little drabber yellow. Excellent. And we got another let it fly here with our tringas and maybe something else in the mix here. Oops, I put the answer up. It's all right. You're gonna get there anyway. Well, I'll make it hard. What's that thing in the middle there on number one? It's
I
Still.
really
didn't see
hard.
it, unfortunately, so I can't cheat. Um, it looks like it's definitely a duck. I would say in the middle on the back of picture
Yeah.
one, not a yellow legs. Even though I can't see the yellow legs, I would probably say it's not.
Yeah, the thing about that duck in the back that jumps out to me is the white stripe on either side of its kind of shoulder area. And that makes it really clear for a green winged teal for me, just based on where the white on the duck is. You can kind of see
Okay.
that its head looks maybe a little bit reddish.
and even
Yeah,
a little green swath.
yeah. You
Mhm.
can't quite tell in the picture that it's green, but it definitely does have that darker spot there along the head.
And it's small too. Look, it's little compared to both these shorebirds, so we know it's not a very big duck. Okay, so green-winged teal is our
Yeah.
duck there on number one, and then probably the two shorebirds are two tringas here are kind of obvious just based on size, maybe.
Yeah, the one on the left is definitely a lot bigger than the one on the right. So I would go with our greater and then lesser. They're also very spangled.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, so what about number two? Now we have a tumbleweed in the mix, or a little part of one. And again, we've got a duck on the right, and we've got just one sandpiper on the left this time.
The first thing that just stands out to me is sort of the size, is that if if we still have a teal, that the teals are pretty small, and the yellow legs looks pretty small to me in comparison. Um, I always like to start with the comparison if you have another bird. So that's kind of the first thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, yeah. And then looking at the bill size of that bird, um, it doesn't look as big as I would expect a greater yellow legs bill to be. So um, I think that makes that a lesser yellow legs.
Hmm. So let's see. I'm gonna differ
Oh,
here.
it's a greater.
And if I think if we were to do that little snap off the bill trick here, we'd see, even though the bird's a little bit angled to us, so it's hard. I think that also makes it a little hard because it's turned its head a little bit our direction to assess that. But it does have a longer bill. And notice you can see, I can see anyway, and maybe it's just my imagination, but it's a little paler at the base. Definitely kind of a blackish, and then it becomes kind of gray toned there. This is a tough call, and sometimes it can be hard when you have just one by itself, and we can't hear what calls it's making. So we definitely ID'd it as yellow legs based on that kind of spangled pattern. And again, eye line is a prominent feature, or supercilium there with a darker eye line on that, helping to recognize it as yellow legs. And it's fairly long-legged as well. Um, but I think we have a grader there. So what about number three?
Hmm.
Hmm.
There's no ducks in this one.
Yeah, at first glance they look so similar. I'm just trying to kind of pull some things
Yeah.
out of there.
That one in the back looks, I mean, it's standing up. It looks like it's standing up on a little higher spot, but it looks
Mhm.
bigger and the bill looks really long from this angle and almost upturned just a touch.
Yeah, even with it sort of
Oh, sweet.
facing away slightly, the bill does look pretty big to me as well.
You can kind of do that imaginary comparison, and I think it would look like it's projecting longer than the head is wide versus these ones on the bottom seem to have about the same bill and head width proportions.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'd be comfortable saying the back one is a greater yellow legs, and then the front ones,
Or not.
they do look smaller.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, we've got a grader behind three lessers. Um, just as an aside, the graders often are less numerous at a given spot once they're both around in decent numbers. The lessers tend to be a little more numerous. You keep your eBird checklist at a good shorebirding spot. You might have double-digit lessers and only a handful of graders. Of course, it's just a rough guide, but that's just in a reality. So good, we've got grader behind three lessers. And I think that might conclude our Let It Fly segment there. You guys did a great job, and I want to say thank you, especially to our to you both, Nate and Laura, but also to all the photographers who have images that I used tonight. Very grateful for your work that makes bird bombs possible, And hopefully all the images are correctly credited on each slide. And if anybody wants to become a photo contributor, just contact me. But thank you so much to our photographers. And we can already look ahead to the next bird bombs coming up on April 10th. And it's going to go a little differently this time. I'm calling it a habitat blast. And our focus is going to be on cone forest or coniferous forest here in Colorado. I'm going to focus especially in the greater Front Range region, as I often do. But Habitat Blast will be a first of a little series of episodes I hope are going to focus on the birds of particular habitat types. Not only just talk about the habitats, but we'll learn about those. But what's the bird community associated with different kinds of cone forests, and what are the resources that birds are keying into in those forests that help create those distinctive communities. So it'll be fun to explore the birds of the cone forest next time around in April, and you can already register for that on the DFO webpage. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and if we have any questions or comments or anything, Laura and Nate can help me out with that.
Yeah, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A function on Zoom and we'll ask those. But David, I have one. I noticed when we were looking at the grebes, um, a lot of them have really intense red eyes, and then some of them have like little paler, more yellowy orange eyes. Is that a function of age or just variation, do you know?
Uh, Definitely adult birds have redder eyes and they get redder in the breeding season. And I believe the horned has brighter red than the ear, a little darker toned or not so red. Um, and I don't know why they're red. There's a number of different water birds that have red eyes, but some don't. And then we have land birds like the spotted towhee that has a nice deep red eye. And so it's not really just about anything connected to being underwater or anything like that, but the you do see some different eye colors depending on what time of year we're at.
Hmm.
Also, so the red becomes brighter in the breeding season.
Oh yeah, someone else actually asked that as I was asking it, so that's good. Jeannie says that she loves bird bombs and thank you, and this is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lynn asks, are there any plumage differences in the grebes between male and female?
No, they look generally pretty much the same in terms of plumage. Um, so that's not a good clue that's going to get us anywhere. And they look pretty much the same size. I think there's maybe some very slight differences between the sexes, but not that we notice. So they'll come out when you see a pair of horned grebes together, male and female, they're pretty much going to look just the same, assuming they're in the same state of plumage.
I had another grebe question myself. I love those distribution graphs that you showed, David, and I think that especially in the springtime, those can be super helpful. I guess my question was just more around, it's not on the spring theme, but on the summer theme, where are the horn grebes going? I noticed that they sort of just like bottom out. Is there breeding area just a lot more further north, or do you know what's happening with that, or why?
That's exactly what's going on. The eared grebe is, in fact, nesting Colorado and across the northern part of the United States and into Canada. But the horn grebe does barely, well, it nests in some of the northern states, but not down here in Colorado, and has a long distribution that extends up into Alaska and northwestern portion of Canada. So it reaches quite a bit farther north than the Erie group, which might be why it's coming through here a little bit earlier to get farther north, got longer to travel, and then it arrives a little later in the fall because it's coming from farther in the north. And the Erie grebes are already down in our region, and so the distribution is definitely a key to that timing difference.
Cool. Deborah asks, do you know how many other shorebirds have yellow legs? You know, we're talking about the greater and lesser yellow legs, and then the sandpiper has kind of yellow legs.
So there are several, and indeed I did a bird bombs called "It Has Yellow Legs." It's focused on fall season or late summer but and it looks, I think, 7 or 8 different short sandpipers that have yellow legs. So we have the yellow legs, the solitary sandpiper, the least sandpiper, Wilson's phalarope, our most common phalarope in the spring has yellow legs. I'm forgetting what else, but if you take a little tour in your bird book, you'll see that there are a number of other sandpipers that have yellow legs, and so it not unique just to those three. Dowitchers have yellowish, kind of drab, but yellowish legs.
Yeah, that's a great reminder since we'll likely be seeing the greater and lesser yellow legs along with other shorebirds that do have yellow legs.
They
Okay.
have the brightest yellow legs, or yellow legs, I think.
Well, I think that is all the Q&A questions that are coming in. Nate, do you have any more questions?
No, I don't. That was great.
All right. Well, thank you both, and thanks everyone for watching. If you want to review, this should be up on our DFO page within a couple days, hopefully. And tell a friend, and hope to see everybody at the April 10th Bird Bombs Habitat Blast Cone Forest. Something a little different. Should be fun. Getting into a great time of the year for the forest as we get into springtime proper. So good night, everyone. Thanks for watching.